Jon Moxley apparently had an entire dissertation as to why he likes blood in wrestling, and he thinks that wrestling should have blood in it. And it goes a little, this is just a little part of it. You can follow the link in the description box below to see most of the rest of this. But so what he says is, to quote, "This is combat sport," says Moxley. "College wrestling is a combat sport too. They have blood timeouts to patch it up. The lowest prelim bout of a UFC card or a boxing card, somebody might have a little blood on their eyebrow or blood coming out of their nose. But they're not selling a blood sport. It's not. Tune in for the blood. Tune in for the gore. It's part of the aesthetic. It adds realism." A much shorter answer, Moxley explained, is that he has so much scar tissue on his eyebrows and head that he cuts very easily. "Sometimes when I don't even want to," says Moxley, "but I only know one speed. That's with my foot onto the gas pedal. If we're going to do something, let's effing do it. That can be detrimental when it comes to negative things like drugs or alcohol, but that's my mindset. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it." Moxley, yes, that is Moxley's mindset. We all know of the issues that he's had in the past. But this is, I think there's a bit of legitimacy to what he's saying. The two things, and the commentators in AEW brought this up, Moxley's done so much blading at this point over the last 3 or 4 years that the scar tissue on his head, even when he doesn't intend to bleed, he's got so much scar tissue over here and over here and over here that he just bleeds anyway. That's what happens when you have a lot of scar tissue, apparently. But I do agree with his thing about that in combat sports, there's going to be blood. And that a little bit of blood here and there can add to the realism, or at least the feeling of realism, the presentation of pro wrestling. It's always been that way. I grew up in the 80s, so I saw tons, especially watching Crockett and the NWA, I saw tons. I saw Dusty bleeding all the time. I've seen Abdullah the Butcher shove forks into people's heads. I've seen all kinds of stuff. Of course, those of us who were in the Attitude Era, if WWF, you saw tons of blood during the Attitude Era. It's nothing new to wrestling. It's always going to be a part of wrestling. Companies decide whether or not they're going to use it. I just mentioned before, New Japan's been has steered away from that stuff over the last 10, 15 years. But that death match that they had, you might see a little bit more of it in New Japan now. I will say this, I do think Moxley does overdo it, but according to this, again, I don't think he intends to overdo it, but I do think there definitely was a period about 6 to 8 months ago when it was a bit excessive in AEW with the blood. I noticed they've toned it down a lot over the last 6 months because AEW does listen to its fans. Doesn't mean that they haven't had any blood, because we've seen blood on most of their pay-per-views, but it's not like every single week we have 3 or 4 matches. There was a period of time where it felt like every week on Dynamite you'd have at least 2 matches with somebody bleeding. But I understand Moxley's point here. Now, whether or not you agree with it, let me know in the comment box below. Let your voice be heard.